Colin Seal, founder and CEO of thinkLaw, and we are looking at Lesson 9 in the neighborhood. This is part of the thinkLaw series that involves settlement and negotiations. Really powerful tool for getting our participants to learn how to really negotiate things with one another, how to really listen to each other for the details that are going to help you actually accomplish the outcomes you're looking for. Something that we do far too less of in our society, whether it's professionally or academically or even personally. So these are really, really useful practical tips we're getting in this lesson. So the outline here is we're looking at basic bargaining strategies based off of a plaintiff's case. And it involves a relatively familiar sort of fact pattern where neighbors' dogs are barking way too loud for way too long. What we'll do then is look at the potential risks of a full damages award, the strengths and weaknesses of this sort of a case, and the negotiation and settlement strategy based off of the strengths and weaknesses of this case. So as we kind of look through the Common Core standards here, especially the speaking and listening ones, which are pretty hard to come by as an instructor in a really kind of structured format, that leads us straight into the example. So a couple of things. In our PowerPoint here, we're actually including images of these dogs, the Tibetan Mastiffs. Now, if you don't have the PowerPoint loading for some reason, then you might want to go and Google what this dog looks like. They're massive dogs and they're known to be extremely loud. So we basically walk through a three-step process for negotiations. It's called the DIM process. Defining issues and interests, identifying BATNAs, which I'll explain in a second, and making an opening offer. The whole goal of this lesson is how do we get to the point where we can make an opening offer that might actually work. A key distinction here is making a difference between issues and interests. Let me give you an example of kind of how this comes to be. So I am originally from New York City, and there's a lot of really old buildings in New York City that happen to be really high, and because they're old, very often the elevators don't move very quickly. So there was a point in like the late 90s, early 2000s where a lot of folks were complaining a lot about how slow these elevators were. But it turned out that to actually repair some of these elevators to the point where the speed would change would cost so much money that it just wouldn't make any sense to ever do. So the issue that folks were having was that the elevators were taking too long to come. That was the issue. But if you actually drill down to what the interests are, you could actually come up with a very different solution that was a lot cheaper than fixing those elevators. What actually happened in this case was, and you'll see this in a lot of buildings throughout New York City and in other places where they have big apartment buildings, they put mirrors in front of every elevator. So now, instead of people complaining about the elevator taking too long, they're looking in the mirror, making sure their tie is right, making sure their dress is on nice, and all of a sudden, waiting for the elevator is no longer such a big issue because it wasn't about waiting for the elevator. The real interest was it's kind of boring to just stand there and feel like you're not doing anything. The point is, when you define interest instead of issues, it gives you more options in terms of solving a problem. So in this case, it's really interesting to start pushing your thinkers on what is the actual interest here. Yes, the dog owners want to keep their dogs, right? But why? What's really going on here? And oftentimes it'll be something around the idea of they just want their property to be safe. They want to protect their farm animals. The homeowners, the neighbors that live next door, yeah, they want the dogs to stop barking, but really what do they want? They want peace and quiet in their homes. So when you're dealing with that framework, you identify those interests, there's a lot more flexibility you have, right? Not just get rid of your dogs. I don't want to hear your dogs anymore, but it's a little bit more room to coming up with creative solutions. So when we talk about what a BATNA is, a BATNA is known as the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So basically, it's in a practical sense, what's the worst thing that will happen to you if you're not able to come up with a deal, right? So if you're the dog owners, then you can't come up with a deal, then maybe you have to get rid of your dogs, right? And then your animals are going to be running loose and they won't have that protection. So maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe in this case, you're being sued for $200,000. So if you lose, you might have to pay all that money. So I probably don't want to do that. I want to figure out a better approach. If you're the neighbors, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. Your BATNA might be a little bit different because in this case, you know, you can try to negotiate a deal or you can try to sue, but maybe you're spending a lot of time in this lawsuit and maybe you don't win and you just have these loud dogs barking indefinitely without being able to change it. So when you kind of look at those strengths and weaknesses, it does help you think about what your opening offer should then be. So this is where there's a lot of room for creativity. I've heard different thinkers come up with ideas ranging from maybe installing soundproof windows to, putting their dogs on a schedule, keeping the dogs inside for part, maybe paying for training for the dogs so that they stop barking so loudly, and coming up with a wide variety of different solutions to actually address the interests here. So, very interesting case, a lot of interesting discussion that comes out of it. Um, at the end of the day, we reveal that they didn't settle this case, and the neighbors actually won $200,000 in damages, and the judge ordered the dogs to be debarked, which is a very extreme remedy that could have been avoided if they just could have come to the table and found some way to agree on resolving these interests here. So the DIM process will come up later on in the Think Law program as well. We end this lesson with a Think Bigger activity that also involves a neighborly sort of concept, but it's a very interesting one that talks about suing because of behaviors that were going on in an apartment building that the landlord didn't do anything to stop. So, interesting case, some interesting arguments on both sides. I would encourage you to have your thinkers use the Draw plus C framework to analyze this, and then that would lead us right into lesson 10, which will be our first interim assessment for Think Law. Thanks.